Hey everybody, welcome back to Cryptolab. It's your old pal Fuzz. Today I'm just going to be doing a quick little kind of abridgment between episode 1 and episode 2. I'm going out of my way to try and figure out how to do audio and video editing, and it's taken me a little longer than I thought. So bear with us as we learn and try to do better with every episode. Today is Storytelling 101. How to craft the best tale that you can possibly craft. I've broken all of this down into 3 steps, 3 easy steps, I think, and we'll just jump right into it. Step 1 is prep. The first thing to remember is this. Learn to think on your feet. Improv is key. You only learn this through experience. So give yourself the time you need to do that. Players are going to wreck your best laid plans. They're going to figure out your most cleverly crafted whodunits halfway through the plot. And they're just generally going to crash everything that you want to get out of your game. Understand this to the core of your being, and then just move forward. There's not a whole lot you can do. So, A. Make a list of NPC names. NPC means non-player character. You hit the net. I like to type in baby names, and then I just start writing down every cool name I can find. It'll come in handy later when you need a seemingly random character to deal with a player character, or, sometimes you'll just want to create a cool villain or what have you. Make sure you've got a list of names ready to go at any given point in time. B is write down your general plot line. Break it down into bullet points of events that you need to occur in the order you need them to occur to get to the end as you've intended. Now, that might seem semi-controversial. There are certain kinds of players who think that if you're not improving the entire damn thing, that you're not really doing your job. Well, to hell with those guys. Do what you need to do. And I know for me, I need to break my plot line down. I'll usually have it set into anywhere between 3 and 5 bullet points. Events that I really want to happen in one way or the other. Nothing is ever really set in stone, though. So, for example, I might want to have a large-scale fight scene at some point during the storyline. And so what I'll do is I'll try and figure out where I want to have it, and I'll try and figure out why I want to have it, and then I will set that in motion. I might have a grouping of characters that are exposed to some kind of event, a murder, a robbery, something along those lines. Something that I can go to my player characters and say, this happened. And what I do with my bullet points is I work them from beginning to end, occasionally from end to beginning. Just depends on how creative I am at that particular point in time. And what I like to do is to have a multitude of plot lines running simultaneously. The real world has billions of story arcs happening every moment of every day. And it's important that if you want to push a semi-realistic version of the world, then one singular plotline might not be enough. But as with all of these rules, use them if they work for you, and if they don't, throw them away. C, you want to prep. You want to prep an A list, a B list, and a C list grouping of characters. These will all be NPCs. You want to provide reasonable detail about them. Generally speaking, little things, styles of dress, personal quirks, what it is that they bring to the table as far as professional skills or lore or what have you. Generally speaking, in every campaign, you want to have a character that you've kind of designated as the lore master, someone who can provide information relegated to whatever the more crypto weirdlyistic subjects that you need to bring to bear. So if you're running a story about demons, you want to have a demonologist. If you're running a you're running a storyline about, say, a religious situation, then you want to have a character who can specialize in that religious sect so that they can provide some crucial information to your characters so that if they begin to flounder as far as progression is concerned, then you can move in and you can solve it. These are your storytellers' actors in your story. And personally, I like to provide at least 10 for each character in the game. Yes, in White Wolf, that means that I, generally speaking, will ignore the contacts and the ally backgrounds. To me, I prefer to provide all that kind of stuff for free. I'm not really comfortable with having a character spend point value on their character in creation on things that I believe don't require you to waste any of the expenditures. So that's just me personally. I know some GMs love to make their players spend points on contacts, allies, backing, etc., etc. And if you're one of those GMs, please feel free to do so. I do not like it. I like to provide my A-list characters, which are generally speaking directly associated with the character, their family, friends, co-workers, and the people that they can call upon during the storyline when they need help, allies, so to speak. My B-list are contacts who provide an occasional bit of essential information or backup for the character. These are a list of characters that you might see pop up once in a storyline, maybe twice. The C list are the off-the-wall kind of seasoning characters, and they're often there to just provide a more lived-in world. They are quirky neighbors. They are, guys down at the gas station who sit around and read the paper as they eat a donut and drink a cup of coffee. You don't necessarily need to go that far. You might find that an A and B list suits you just fine. But I enjoy throwing in characters every now and again who don't really have anything to do with the narrative. They're just there to provide like I said, a lived-in world, to make it seem like there are people out there who don't exist for the express purpose of moving storyline. D is that you want to build your villain or villains. You want to give your antagonist creative reasons for doing what they're doing. Having someone being evil for the sake of evil is just fine, but it is kind of lame. The best thing that you can do is to create really interesting reasons why your villain does what he or she does. Maybe they're doing it for love. Maybe they're doing it because they're scared. There are tons and tons of great reasons. Virtually every reason that you can give a hero for doing whatever it is that they're going to do, you can give the exact same reason behind your villain. Don't settle for stereotypes. the quirkier and the more idiosyncrasies, the better the villain. You can spend literally days just delving into why your villain is your villain. And I like to set up, generally speaking, between 3 and 5 villains every story arc. And I tend to approach it in a bit of a video gamey kind of way, where there'll be lieutenants and then bosses. And you'll learn of the lieutenants very early. The bosses you tend to find out very, very late. And of course, the bosses are incredibly powerful. But you don't have to work in that style. That's just the way I like to do it. E. Choose the length of your story. You can go campaign style, which is kind of just going and never really stopping until inevitably the game goes kaput. And that's fine. You can get a lot of really great stuff out of that. Personally, I like to do it in seasons, like television shows. And what I will do is I'll set myself a particular limit on how many episodes, i.e. games, that I'm going to get out of this season. I'll try and work within 12 to 13, but occasionally it might run a little further depending on how many people can get in solo games. But as far as the group game is concerned, I always try and move in between 10 and 12. And what I do is I just set it up in the same way you would set up a novel or, a book. And I work in just tiny little parts where every game I try and move a bit of the plot ahead into what I think is going to be the next stage, while simultaneously providing my individual players with at least a modicum of individual story progression. Pardon me. F is understanding the difference between story and plot. Generally speaking, you're always going to refer to what you're doing as a story. But plot is something that you can write down usually in about a sentence, maybe 2. Character A needs to get X, Y, and Z done so that he can save the world. That's a plot. And it's fairly simple. That's Game Master storyline. That's your meta plot. That's your overarching storyline that is going to lead you to the end of your season or your campaign. Plot is very important because it's the meat and potatoes of the story. Now, story, in quotations, is what players choose to do. If a player decides that they're going to start helping out a friend of theirs who needs a leg up, then that's a story. That's something that your players can get behind, that's related directly to their character, that is relating to directly to the character's life. That's having to get up and go to work every day. That's maybe having an abusive spouse or loved one. That's dealing with that situation. That's storyline, and that's the kind of stuff that you're really going to dig into as a means to really get a lot out of each individual game. There should always be personal elements to your overarching storyline, the meta plot, so to speak. And the more that you can provide for each individual character, then the better. Now, G is that you treat each character as if they're the central hero in the story. This can be complicated, but everybody should be Neo. Everybody should be Superman. Everybody should be Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Green Lantern, whatever. They should be, or at least they should feel, like they're the central hero in the storyline. And if you have 5 people at the table, this can be exceedingly difficult. But what you need to understand is that everyone who comes to that table to sit down and game, very few of those people are coming to the game with the expectation of being someone's sidekick. And if you keep that in mind and you go out of your way to make sure that each character has their own flowing storyline with their own collection of NPCs that are exclusive to that individual character, it's really not that difficult. You'll be able to get it usually in just a few games. Now, part 2 is execution. Execution is how you tell your story, the tactics that you use in order to pull off making a really great campaign or season or story or plot. A is pacing. Don't let the story run ahead of where you want it to be. You're the storyteller. If the players manage to get a leg up on you and start to maybe rush ahead a little bit, throw in a couple of things that are going to slow them down. You throw in some bureaucratic red tape. Throw in a fight scene. Throw in an earthquake. Whatever you need. But control the pacing. Don't let the players dictate where your story is going to go and how fast you're going to tell it. B is raising and lowering your voice. Now, most games tend to have a lot of laughter, a lot of out of character, ribbing, and shit talking. That's a good thing. We're all there to have fun. But when you want to control the game setting, slowing the way that you talk, raising your voice, lowering your voice, these are all tried and true tactics that will get players to pay attention. If you lower your voice and you start talking very, very slowly, you'll notice that your players will lean in a little bit. They might tilt their head down because they're listening. And that's important. There's plenty of times that you might need to get across crucial information and everybody has just spent the last 10 minutes laughing their ass off about some dick and fart joke. And when that happens, and you want to corral everybody back into the storyline, then you lower your voice, speak slowly, and then you make them wait. In their mind, they're jumping ahead. They're trying to think, what is this person going to say? And that's when you got them. Part C, or I should say just C, not part C. You want to stay behind yourself, but you want to stay ahead of your players. That means that when you're telling your story, you always want to be able to see where you're going. You always want to know how many games it's going to take to get to a particular scene that you've bullet pointed, or maybe a particular event that you've prepared for. You want to stay behind yourself so that you can see very clearly where you're going, but at the same time, you want to know your players as best you can, and you want to stay ahead of their plans, their plots. Now, it's important that you don't metagame in a situation like that. You don't want to have a player tell you all of the really cool stuff that they want to do, and then you go ahead and you railroad every single concept that they've thrown to the table. That's kind of bullshit. They know it, you know it. But at the same time, it's important that if your players are planning some kind of massive coup to the storyline that could potentially throw a massive monkey wrench in your plans, that you're prepared. D. Use all 5 senses. Use music. You want to make your world feel lived in. When you're describing a scene, it's fine to go down the list. Taste, touch, hearing, sight, and whatever in the hell the 5th one is. Smell, which is ridiculously important. You can use all 5 senses in your descriptions to provide a wealth of information regarding what's currently happening. And you'll also find that as you do that, it will invest players. Players will be asking more questions if you involve more senses. If you go out of your way to make sure that they know what maybe you have a villain who happens to smell like lilacs. That'll be important, because then later on, if you say you smell lilacs, then hopefully, if you've built your villain correctly, the hair on the back of their neck will stand up just a little bit. E. Define your NPCs. You want to make every NPC a character. Now, there are plenty of lists online that you can find that have random lists of idiosyncrasies and, fidgets and all that kind of stuff. And it's fine. Download one. Write a few down, maybe a list of 10 or 20, whatever you need. But when you create an NPC, it's important to remember that NPC can potentially save a character's life or potentially kill a character. They are just as important as the player characters are. They are your actors. They're the characters that you will play throughout the course of this game. And the more interesting that you make them, the more interesting the entire game is going to be. There's nothing cooler than when a game is over and having a player tell you how much they adored or how badass a particular NPC was. F. Corral your players when needed. It seems fairly obvious, but players, despite themselves, can be very smart. And sometimes they will get ahead of you. When that happens, you need to grab that leash and you need to pull on it hard. And you need to control where they're going. Now, again, there are a lot of GMs who disagree with that. And that's fine by me. But for me, personally, I find that if my players manage to get ahead of me, then it's time to create a series of seemingly random events that are intended to slow down progression. And that includes potentially killing off NPCs that the characters are close to, all sorts of things. Like I said earlier, you can use natural disasters, you can use unfortunate deaths, you can use random fight scenes, whatever it is that you need to do to slow them down. And on a side note, don't be afraid to tell your player characters what they're feeling. There are a great deal of GMs who try and fight that idea and say that that should be expressly in the realm of what the player wants out of the scene. But for the purpose of D&D or something along those lines, whatever. But in World of Darkness, we're talking about trying to run a horror game. Personal horror is difficult to create, and there are times when you need to stop and tell a bravado style badass character that right now he's petrified. And that doesn't have to be some bizarre magical effect or vampiric discipline or demonic lore. It can just be that he's scared. Don't be afraid to tell your players what their character is feeling, because you can't control what you feel. And with that in mind, that should fall under the Game Master's purview. Use it as you see fit. G. Use dice only when necessary. Some of you love to hear those dice roll, and that's fine. If you're one of those game masters that's just gotta make a player roll for every little thing they do, that's fine by me. Personally, I don't like to do that. If a character walks into a room, the first thing I don't do is say roll perception. A perception alertness check implies that there's something potentially hidden in that room. Now, if there is something potentially hidden in that room, I will say that. But generally speaking, if they run into a room, I will just describe the room. If a character needs to run up 30 flights of stairs, I'm not going to make them do a stamina check. I want to move the story forward. So keep that in mind. Dice slow the game down. So use dice only when there is direct opposition. Combat, certain kinds of skill rolls, little things like that. But, if a player is deciding that they're going to try and pick a lock and they've got more than 2 or 3 dots in the security skill, then don't make them roll. If they got 1 dot, well, yeah, make them roll. But if they got 3 or more, hell no. I'm not going to waste my time on that. You shouldn't either. H. Create an economy of wordplay. Don't waste time on things that don't matter. There are a lot of times that GMs will digress and they will start to tell you about a pattern on a carpet or wallpaper. They'll kind of really Anne Rice it up. And when that happens, hey, that's fine. Everyone does it from time to time. But it's important to keep in mind that unless you're one of those lucky folks who gets to start running a game at, say, 11 a.m. and that game runs till midnight, then chances are you don't have the time to waste on that kind of narration. Create a system that allows you to push storyline forward, being creative, of course, being descriptive, but only on the things that matter. Don't waste time telling your players how intricately detailed a wall of graffiti is unless it actually matters. I understand your system, combat, initiative, attack, defense, skills, social interactions, and perception checks. That's the whole game right there. Know how to fight. Know how to fight. Know how to defend yourself in a fight. Make sure that your characters, your NPCs, are prepared for what the characters can throw at them. Understand that social interactions are complex and that dice rolls don't necessarily have to reflect a character's reaction. If you have a character who steps into a room and is acting like a raging asshole, and everyone sees it, and then that character, say, sees a particularly attractive young lady and decides to come over and turn on the charm, well, chances are he's going to bomb out. That woman's already seen him being a raging dick. Perception checks, as I said earlier, can be confusing. A lot of people will just make you roll to see whatever it is that you see. But that's a waste of time. Use a perception check when the characters have missed something important or could potentially miss something important. If a player asks to make a perception check, let them. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything there for them to perceive. But if there is, or you decide that you want to throw in a bone now and again, do it. Part 3, the payoff. Now, running games, you'll find, are simple. It takes some time, it takes some experience, but once you get there, sitting down and having a improv session with 3 or 4 people is easy. You just learn to say yes and a lot. When a player says, I'm going to punch the bad guy in the balls, you say yes. And he falls over onto a pile of shoddily stacked wood, sending a particularly large plank over, which then tips over a grouping of paint buckets that then fall down on your best friend, covering him in pea soup colored acrylic paint. Now your best buddy can't see. What you will find is that once you get to the payoff, every little bit of game that's led up to this moment needs to tie together somehow. And this does require you to plan ahead. So when you know that the game session is about to end it on a cliffhanger. This is A. You end the session on a cliffhanger. It makes players want to come back. It makes players not want to leave. They want to keep moving. And you tell them to burn in hell. I'll see you next week. B. is ending the story. You want to create tension. Let the characters overcome a great set of odds. You want to provide closure. You can end your game on a high note or a low note, a question, a mystery. Handle your business. Prepare your ending in advance. Know how it's going to go down. Make it cinematic. Make it worthwhile. There's nothing worse than getting to an ending and having the player characters smoke the bad guy and then look around and say, well, what's next? C. Handling downtime. Downtime is whenever you need to move the storyline ahead, a day, an hour, a week, a year, whatever it may be. That time is called downtime. That's when experience points generally get spent. That is when characters can pursue personal projects, can learn new things, can meet new characters that they would never get the opportunity to meet while they're actually doing the game. You have structured time, and then you have downtime. Structured time is combat, is a logical progression of events. Downtime is much more nebulous. You can get a lot of crazy stuff done during downtime. Use it to your advantage. Don't just let the characters move their own stuff ahead, but move the bad guys' plot line ahead. If the characters aren't actively seeking out certain things and you go into downtime, punish them. Don't just hand over the storyline to them. Make it so that when they finally get finished with all their downtime stuff, that they find that the villain has actually moved the plot several steps ahead of where they thought that it should be. And don't back down on that. Make your players work for it. D. Letting your story belong to the players. Learn to let it go. This is one of the toughest things that I do. I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm an author, so when I write stories, I like to be in control of it. But the key thing about being a game master is knowing that you're not really telling your story for yourself here. You're telling it for them. And with that in mind, you have to understand that there are times when they're just going to want to do something that has nothing to do with what you want them to do. And you have to let them do it. You have to set that boat in the ocean and push it out to sea and just watch where it goes. You're going to make mistakes. It's inevitable. Don't sweat it. Bullshit your way through any scenario that you're anxious about or that you don't feel like you know enough of the rules about. Don't worry about it. Move on. This is your show. You run it. You handle it the way that you want to handle it. If someone says that they've figured out the plot, cool. Change it. Change it on the fly if necessary. If someone figures out who the killer is, change it. You can always say later that it was a red herring the whole time. No one knows. This is your story. So with that in mind, you've completed your Storytelling 101 class. Send $250 to me, and I'll get your diploma in the mail in 6 to 8 weeks' time. Go forth. Make tales. Do cool stuff. This is your old pal Fuzz with Cryptolab, and and I will talk to you when I talk to you. Have a good one.